You must have noticed that sometimes when you open a web page, it gives you a file for download. For example, when you're downloading a software from web, or you're opening a PDF file, or maybe you're downloading a movie. In all these examples, the server is actually sending a file in the response to the client. And we can achieve the same thing in ASP.NET Core application using FileResult. So there are three types of file results: virtual file result, physical file result, and file content result. Let's understand each of these one by one with an example, and let's understand when to use which one. And let's start with virtual file result. But before that, the first thing which I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new controller. For that, you can right click on this controllers folder, select add, and then select controller. Okay, so this is another way in which you can create a controller. Now, when you use this option here, you will see three templates which you can select from. Now again, since we are learning everything from scratch, I'm going to select MVC controller empty. Let me click on this add button. Let's call it maybe file controller. Okay, and let me remove this one from here, and let's create this controller. And again, here I will name this namespace as controllers. Let me actually name this folder as controllers. All right, now let's say we have this index action method here, and from within this index action method, we want to return a file result. And for that, I'm going to set the return type as virtual file result. And from within this function, we want to return a new instance of virtual file result. Now, we use this virtual file result when the file which we want to send in the response is present in the web root directory. We have learned about web root directory in our previous lectures when we talked about use static file middleware. Right. So, for example, currently we don't have the web root directory here, but basically we can create that web root directory by creating a new folder. So let me go ahead and let me create a new folder, and we can call this folder as www root. So this is the web root directory of ASP.NET Core project. And inside this web root directory, we can keep all our static files which we want to serve. Okay, let me also close this file. So basically, using this virtual file result, we can return any file in the response which is present inside this web root directory. To this virtual file result, we need to specify a relative path related to this www root directory, and then we also need to specify the content type which we are going to return. For example, application/PDF or application/XML, etc. Now currently we don't have any file inside this www root directory, so let's go ahead and let's add a new file here. For that, here I have this sample.pdf. I'll simply copy it from here and I will paste it inside this www root folder. Okay, now what we want is we want to send this file in the response. Now, since we are using virtual file result here, what we need to do is we need to specify the relative path of this sample.pdf file to this constructor. And the relative path here will be /sample.pdf. So the relative path is basically calculated from this www root directory. If inside this www root directory, if I create a new folder, and let's say I call this folder as samples, okay, and let me go ahead and let me cut it from here and let me paste it inside this samples folder. So now this sample.pdf is present inside this samples folder. So the relative path now will be /samples/sample.pdf. Okay. So basically using this virtual file result, we specify the relative path of the file which we want to send in the response. And that file must be present inside the web root directory. In our example, the web root directory is www root folder. And the second argument which we need to specify here is the content type. So here the content type is going to be application/PDF. Now let's specify the route for which we want to call this index method. For that, I'm going to use attribute routing. And here let's say the route is going to be file/download file. Okay. Let's go ahead and let's run this application. And after the root URL, let's say /file/download file. Let's press enter. And here you will see the PDF content in the browser. Okay. Now here, instead of using this new virtual file result constructor, what we can also do is we can use file method. Okay, and this should also work. Now this file method is present inside this controller class. So when you're using this file method, you make sure that your controller class inherits from this controller class. If we go ahead and if we run the application again, and if we type the URL, which is /files/download file, okay, we still see the result. All right, so this is about virtual file result, and we can use virtual file result when the file which we want to send in the response, it is present inside the web root directory, so that we can specify the relative path of that file. But what if the file is not present in web root directory and it is completely present outside of the project? For example, I have copied this sample.pdf from this file path from C drive sample files. So let's say instead of reading the sample.pdf from the web root directory, we want to read it from this file directory. How can we do that? So for that, we cannot use this virtual file result, because this virtual file result we can use in order to send a file in the response when that file is present in the web root directory. Because when we are using this virtual file result, at that time we can only specify the relative path, and this relative path will be relative to web root directory. So what if I want to send a file in the response which is not present in the project folder? It is completely outside of the project folder. In that case, we can use physical file result. Okay, so let me go ahead and let me create another action method, and it is going to return a physical file result, and let me call it maybe file download, and I'll call it file download 2. All right, let me also go ahead and let me call this index method as file download 1, just to give some meaningful name here. And here we want to return a physical file result. So for that, I'm going to use new keyword and physical file result, because here we want to return an instance of physical file result. There we need to specify the absolute path of the file as well as the content type. So for the absolute path, I will go there where I have my file. I will copy the path. So it is in C drive sample files. Let's specify that path and also the file name. So file name is sample.pdf, and the content type is again going to be application/pdf. All right, now let's also specify a route. So again, I will copy this attribute route, and here let's say the route is going to be maybe file/download file 2. Let's test this out. Let's run the application, and let's go ahead and let's type the URL. So it is /file/download file 2. And you see, we are still getting the result, but this time we are returning a result of type physical file result, and we are returning the file which is not present in the current project folder. We are returning a file which is present outside of the current project folder. Okay, and we can do that by returning an instance of new physical file result. Now instead of using this new physical file result, we can also use physical file method. Okay, and this physical file method behind the scenes returns an instance of physical file result. Again, in order to use this physical file method, your controller must be inheriting from this controller class. All right, so I hope the difference between virtual file result and physical file result is clear to you. We use virtual file result when we want to return a file in the response which is present in this www root directory. And we use physical file result when the file is not present in the web root directory or in the project folder. Instead, it is present outside of the project folder. Now, you can of course use this physical file result in order to return a file in the response which is present in the www root folder, but it is not advisable. And also, when you're using this physical file result in order to return a file which is present in the web root directory, There, you need to specify the absolute path of that file. You cannot specify the relative path there. You need to specify the absolute path. All right. Now, sometimes in your project, you might be having a file which has been loaded from another data source as a byte array. For example, let's say you are reading an image from a database table. In that case, you will have file content as raw data in the form of byte array, and you can return that byte array as file content result. Basically, whenever you have file content as byte array and you want to return that content in the response, you use file content result. It's pretty useful when you're reading the images from the database or you have retrieved byte array from another data source such as web APIs. Let me show you this with an example. So let's say we have another action method, and for that I'll simply copy this one and I'll paste it here. I'll call it file download 3. Okay, and let's also change the route to file download 3. All right, now let's say here, instead of having the physical file, what we have is we have the file content as a byte array. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a byte array variable. I'll simply call it byte, and I'm going to read the content of this sample.pdf. So for that, in the system.io namespace, we have class called file. This file is a static class, and on that we have a method called read all bytes. And what I want is I want to read the content of this sample.pdf as bytes. So I will specify the path. Okay. So what will happen here is this read all bytes will read the content of this sample.pdf file, and it will return the content of that file as raw data in the form of byte array. And we are storing that byte array inside this byte variable. Let's actually call it bytes because byte is a reserved keyword. Now I want to return this content in the response. So here I don't have a physical file which I want to return in the result. Instead, I have a file content in its raw format as byte array, and I want to return that content in the response. How can we do that? For that, we have another return type which is file content result. Okay, and here we want to return a new instance of file content result. And there we don't need to specify the path of the file. Instead, we can specify the content of the file in the byte array, and we are actually storing it inside this bytes variable. So let's specify that. And this should be it. Here, instead of returning a file in the response, we are returning its content. And how we are returning it? By returning a new instance of file content result. Let's go ahead and let's run the application again and let's test it out. Let's go ahead and let's type the URL. So it is /file/download file. So download-file 3. And now you see, again, we can see the PDF file. Let me actually put a breakpoint here inside this action method, and let me show you what this bytes contain. So let's run this application again. Let's go ahead and let's type the URL. So it is /file/download-file 3. And you see the breakpoint has hit. Let me press F10 and F10. And if I hover over this bytes, you will see that here it is basically a byte array. Okay. So the content has been converted to byte array. And then we are passing that byte array content to this content file result. If I continue, we should see that content as a PDF file in the browser. All right. Now here, instead of using this new file content result, here we can use file method. So let me stop debug here. So we used this file earlier also when we wanted to return this virtual file result. And we can use this file method when we want to return file content result. And this should also be working as expected. So if I run this application again, And if we type the URL, so it is slash file slash download file 3. You see, it is still working. So this file method here, it is a shortcut to new file content result. In the same way, this file method here, it is shortcut to new virtual file result. And this physical file method, it is shortcut to new physical file result. And all these methods are present inside this controller class. So this is all from this lecture. If you have any questions, then feel free to ask it. Thank you for listening and have a great day.